Breaking. Diddy's case just took a shocking turn, as his dairy is found in burnt safe. Before you watch, hit like and subscribe right now for the most explosive updates. They called it the trial that could sink a kingdom built on platinum records and diamond-dipped dreams. Outside the courthouse, news vans pressed against barricades, reporters chanted rumors like a choir of hungry ghosts. Inside, the air was heavy with old secrets finally dragged into daylight. Sean Diddy Combs, once the king of hip-hop royalty and luxury liquor ads, now sat behind a battered defense table, his silk tie too tight against the pulse pounding in his neck. He looked thinner than the magazines remembered, as if each revelation had shaved pieces off his armor, until only raw nerve remained. This morning, the spectators knew something extraordinary would happen. Whispers darted through the gallery. They found it, the diary, hidden in a safe, buried behind steel and flames. No PR spin could bury this now. The prosecutor, a hawk-eyed woman named Geneva Price, had built her entire closing on the promise of this diary. That Diddy's own words would prove he'd orchestrated more than chart-topping hits. At precisely 9 a.m., Judge Meredith Harlow swept into the chamber. Her presence hushed the buzzing hall like a sudden storm rolling over a restless sea. She was old school, black robe ironed to military crispness, eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. "Bring me the evidence," she commanded, and a young clerk scurried forward, cradling the charred remains like a holy relic. The diary was more ruin than book. Half its cover eaten by flames, the leather bubbled and cracked. But the pages survived, each line of ink now a vein of truth that might poison its creator. "Mr. Combs's counsel," Harlow said, her voice low but lethal. "Do you wish to contest its reading before the court?" His lead lawyer, Milton Fraser, tried to muster a grin, but it collapsed on his dry lips. "Your Honor, we object to the entire document being read aloud." Overruled. The gavel stayed silent. Harlow didn't need wood and hammer. Her voice was enough. She turned the brittle cover. A hush deeper than prayer settled over the room. The judge read the first words softly, as if stirring an ancient ghost awake. March 31st. Somewhere between dusk and dawn. I can't sleep. I haven't slept in months without hearing Andre's laughter at the end of my bed. He laughs the way he did before the concrete took him. I tell myself it wasn't my fault, but then I see the money trail. My signature, my silence. Gasps skipped across the benches like sparks. A few young interns scribbled notes they'd sell to gossip sites before noon. At the defense table, Diddy folded his hands so tight the knuckles went bone white. His eyes fixed on the oak grains of the table, refusing to flinch. The judge continued, her voice picking up weight with each line. "I've tried to outrun the graveyard I built. My mother thinks I'm still her golden boy. My children think I'm a lion. But the lions, I know, never sleep. They stay awake because they fear the hyenas that circle in the dark. I am no lion. I'm a man with too much to lose and nowhere to confess." Somewhere in the back row, a young woman pressed her palm over her mouth. She had lost her cousin in a club, shooting everyone blamed on bad luck. Now, hearing this, luck seemed cheap. Harlow turned a page with surgical care. Ash crumbled onto her robe, but she didn't pause to brush it away. "They think I buried the evidence under 100 lawyers and 1,000 NDAs. They're wrong. I buried it in me. But the fire won't burn it out. I feel it in my bones. Maybe the fire is for me, to cauterize the sins, to leave nothing but the ashes for you vultures to pick clean." A single cough cracked the tension, but no one dared whisper. Not here, not now. Fraser leaned toward his client. "We can ask for a recess. You don't have to let this stand." Diddy didn't answer. His mind was elsewhere. Maybe with Andre's laughter in the shadows. Maybe with the chorus of voices that could no longer be silenced by a signed check. Judge Harlow's eyes flicked to the final page, the one everyone feared and craved in equal measure. April 1st, the final night. If this is found, it means they won. Or maybe I did. Maybe I wanted this. They say the truth sets you free, but truth has no mercy. It doesn't care about plaques or Grammys or Forbes lists. It rips you open and lets the worms crawl in. The judge paused. Her next breath quivered like a violin string. Then she read the last lines that no publicist could ever spin. "To whoever holds this diary, I have built an empire on the backs of ghosts. If they bury me tomorrow, know this: I was guilty of many things, but silence was my worst crime. Maybe now you'll all be free of me." A murmur broke. People cried openly, not for Diddy, but for the families his empire had crushed beneath the velvet ropes of his fame. Judge Harlow laid the diary down as if it might bite her. She faced the jury, her eyes old and sad. "This concludes the reading of the final entry." A reporter's pen scratched like thunder in the hush. She turned to Diddy. For a heartbeat, she was not a judge. Just a woman staring at a man who once sold the world a dream, and now sat hollowed out by the cost of it. "Mr. Combs," she said softly, "do you have anything to say to this court?" He rose, slow as an old man, not the unstoppable icon the world thought bulletproof. He didn't look at his lawyers. He didn't look at the press or the fans weeping on the marble floor. He looked straight at the ceiling, perhaps hoping Andre's ghost was perched there, waiting to see if the king would beg. "I built all this," he rasped. "Every hit, every dollar, every secret you vultures feed on. I didn't write that diary to confess. I wrote it because I was tired of hearing my own lies bounce back at me in every studio wall." He pointed at the diary, a blackened thing that had outlived more enemies than any bodyguard. "That book is my real legacy, not the music, not the awards. That, burn it if you want, or sell it. I don't care anymore." His voice cracked like dry wood. "Just tell my kids. Tell them I tried to keep the wolves away. Tell them the man in those pages was never the father I wanted to be." He sat. The room seemed to exhale as one, a sigh pulled from 1,000 lungs who hadn't realized they'd been holding their breath. Judge Harlow turned to the jury. "When we reconvene," she said firmly, "you will hear the prosecution's closing statement, and then you will decide not just the fate of this man, but whether the truth still means anything in this country." Her gavel struck. The echo danced like a drum beat for the funeral of an empire. As the echo of the gavel faded, the courtroom did not spring back to chatter. No one leapt for the doors or flicked open their phones. They sat, rooted in the confession that hung like smoke above polished floors and velvet robes. At the prosecutor's table, Geneva Price closed her binder with deliberate calm. To her, this was not a victory yet. She knew juries were fickle, and that powerful men had a way of escaping the weight of words when handshakes and hush money dripped like honey behind locked doors. But today felt different. Today, she thought, the empire itself was bleeding from the inside out. Reporters dashed to the lobby to phone in live updates. Outside, a riot of voices and lenses swarmed the courthouse steps, each trying to spin Diddy's last words before they hardened into legend. Some called it a breakdown. Some called it a performance. Some whispered it was the final marketing stunt of a man who knew how to turn scandal into streams. Inside, though, the man was no mogul. He was just a father, shoulders bent, eyes dull, as a clerk approached him with a trembling slip of paper. A summons for tomorrow's continuation. The judge gathered her robes and addressed the room once more, this time not from behind the shield of the bench, but as a human being who had read the confessions of a king who had built his palace on the bones of better men. "I remind the jury," she said, her voice stripped of the courtroom polish, "the burden of proof remains with the prosecution. What you heard today is the defendant's own record. What you decide tomorrow is whether that record means guilt under the law." She let her gaze drift over the gallery. Mothers whose sons never made it out of those diamond-encrusted parties alive. Widows who traded wedding rings for subpoenas. Young rappers who once worshipped the man now stripped bare before them. She sighed. Just a breath. But the court reporters captured it all the same. Dismissed until tomorrow. In the hall, people spoke in whispers. Words like murderer and martyr floated in equal measure. The jury shuffled past, eyes downcast, careful not to meet the camera crews waiting at the revolving doors. No one wanted to be the first to admit the power of a diary, scribbled by a man who once told the world he feared nothing. Back inside, Diddy remained seated long after the rows had emptied. Only Fraser stayed by his side, shuffling papers into an expensive briefcase that now seemed laughably inadequate against the diary's scorched testimony. "You want to get out through the back, sir?" Fraser asked gently. Diddy didn't move. His fingers traced an invisible line on the table's edge. To him, the room was gone. He was back in that hallway mirror, seeing Andre's reflection flicker over his shoulder, smiling like a wolf who had waited long enough. "I thought I could outlive it all," he murmured to no one in particular. "But the fire didn't care who I used to be." Fraser didn't answer. He knew some ghosts weren't meant for lawyers to cross-examine. In the judge's chambers, Harlow stood before a narrow window overlooking the marble steps below. She watched the crowd fracture and reassemble, chanting pieces of a man's confession they would argue about on podcasts and talk shows for weeks to come. She rested a hand on the charred diary, now sealed in an evidence bag that smelled faintly of smoke. It weighed more than she expected, not in grams or ounces, but in human ruin. She thought about her own children, grown now, raising babies who would inherit a world where power often eclipsed consequence. She wondered if this case would remind people that secrets rot the strongest foundations, or if tomorrow's headlines would polish the horror back into entertainment. A knock at her door. "Come," she said, voice steadier than her heart. Geneva Price stepped inside, exhaustion lining her sharp features. "Your Honor, closing remarks are ready. We'll bury him tomorrow." Harlow turned, meeting her gaze evenly. "No, Miss Price. If we do this right, the truth buries itself. We just read the tombstone." The prosecutor's eyes softened, just for a heartbeat. She nodded, closed the door behind her, and left the judge alone with the weight of blackened pages that had survived fire, vault, and fame. Outside, night crept over the city, dragging neon lights through the dark like fresh sins waiting to be committed. Inside, the last echo of Diddy's empire trembled between marble columns and oak benches. Not gone, not forgiven. Just finally spoken aloud for everyone to see. Tomorrow, the jury would decide if the king would fall. Tonight, the ghosts in the walls could finally sleep.